Fringe meeting, which is titled Financing Nature, Restoring Our Greatest Economic Asset. My name is Benet Northcote. I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Environment Network, and I'm very, very honoured to be here with, I have to say, a very illustrious panel. We've got Guy Opperman, who is needs no introduction as the Minister for Pensions and Financial Inclusion, and the MP for Extinction, but I'll introduce you anyway. Next to me is Minette, the President of the National Farmers Union. To my right, Katie White, the Executive Director of Advocacy and Campaigns at WWF. And finally, on my far right, Ruth Edwards, the MP for Rushcliffe and an important member of our Sen Parliamentary Caucus. So thank you all very much for being here. Our Minister sadly has to dash away at 5 o'clock because his private office have double booked him, or someone has double booked him. Yeah, exactly. So he's going to dash at 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 minutes each from each panellist, and I'm going to try and be strict on that if that's okay. And then we will go into the main discussion. So we're talking about financing nature and restoring our greatest economic asset. And of course, at the start of the year, we had the landmark report that was published, which was the Dasgupta review. And that set out how we can use markets to reverse the decline of the natural world and put nature on the balance sheet. So what's required next to scale up the private markets for nature? What is needed? Is it payments by developers for tree planting or other forms of habitat creation? Or what else do we need to do to comply with the new biodiversity net gain requirements in the Environment Bill? Or indeed, what role for nature in offsetting residual emissions? And how do we ensure that payments lead to results so that markets for nature and carbon deliver additional long-term environmental improvements? There's a lot to talk about. It can go global from the Amazon or local to what we might do in our uplands on how do we restore peatlands. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and ask Guy to start by saying a few words. The final thing I should just say to all panelists, we are being streamed, I think, at the back of the event as well, so can you make sure that you're speaking into the microphone as you go? Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to stand up and speak to the microphone that way. I hope that is allowed and permitted without knocking over things behind me. Good afternoon. My name is Guy Opperman. I'm the MP for Hexham. I'm the Minister for Pensions. I look after all estate pension and I regulate over £1 trillion worth of private workplace pensions. I also represent the largest constituency in England with more uplands, more Hadrian's Wall, a lot more sheep than most people have voters, and by and large, it is the best place to represent. I want to try and address this in 3 particular ways. The first is, I'm proud at DWP that we lead the way in what is called ESG. If you don't know what ESG is, by the end of this conference, and I hope through the work of CEN, who I'm proud to support, you will know a great deal more. But the E stands for environment, and it puts environmental policy at the heart of investment. And basically, in respect to pensions investments, there has to be due account taken of climate change. That is seismic in its terms of its investment power and the change that that then results in. The second bit is the social element. And we are the first country in the world to introduce things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We're the first country in the world to do a bill like the Pension Schemes Bill of 2021 that is genuinely transformational in this space. But we're also the first country in this world to look at what the social element of ESG means. And that means not just things like supply chains, where do things that you buy come from, but it also means the social impact of the purchases that you make and the consequences of the investment decisions you make. And these are hugely important changes that the Theresa May government and the government under Prime Minister Boris Johnson have brought in. You're going to be looking for hard cash. Trust me, I can assure you Minette will be looking for hard cash as to how it is that we're going to do the transformation that all of us want to do. And we are on a journey. To pretend anything else is naive. And let me give you one example of hard cash. So you probably don't know what a green gilt is. But if you do know what a green gilt is, it is the investment that is made by government in a bond or a gilt that is government-backed but can be bought into by pension schemes and by institutional investors. They buy that, and the first one is worth 15 billion. There's another one of about 10 billion coming very shortly, and this is very serious money. This is billions of pounds of money. And if you look up Green Gilt, Rishi Sunak, and Nature, you will see that one of the specific aims of the Green Gilt, yes, it is going to be helping things like renewable energy. Yes, it is going to be helping to kickstart some of the investment that we need in some of the new modern businesses to help us to get net zero. But it is also specifically aimed at getting us some nature recovery and the support for the natural environment and the environment network, and something that CEN have championed. So please, if you forget nothing else, when people say to you, you're not investing in any way in nature, you're not investing in any way in aligning finance with what we're doing, you can turn to them and say, well, there is this thing, which I've just learned about, called a green gilt. It's worth 15 billion. There'll be another 10 billion coming next year, and it is going to be utterly transformational. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Guy. Right, next we're going to go to Katie White from WWF. Katie.
Thank you very much, Benet. And I'm very conscious of time, so please do, because it's such an exciting topic. There's lots to say. And thank you to Sen and the esteemed panel for getting me here today. I agree with Guy that we are on a journey, but we're also at a remarkable nexus point, really, on this journey. And we think about post-Brexit, we have an opportunity to recast our landscape within the UK. And that landscape, we need to be reducing our emissions, we need to be restoring nature, but at the same time, we could align that with making the UK finance at the centre of a green and resilient recovery. Wouldn't that be fantastic? So you might be thinking, why on earth is WWF talking about this? We're, fluffy pandas and jaguars, etc. Well, for us, one species is not going to cut it. The incredible author Elizabeth Colbert talks about the sixth mass extinction. She describes it like Jenga and this tower of species, and you can pull out different species, which is horrifying, but at the top of that tower is us. And it's not just about one species, it's about all of us together and about the future of humanity. And we have tipped our planet into a new era, which we're in the driving seat of, which puts us at that risk of destabilizing our planet. And what can we do? And as I'm sure that Ruth will talk about today, deforestation is one of the biggest threats to our climate, to wildlife, and to local people who rely on forests for their livelihood. WWF's done 2 reports recently which just show how we're looking at that nature and finance piece together. One looked at 300 UK-based financiers, and of those 300, they were directly providing 40 billion, which was assisting in deforestation, companies that were threatening deforestation in Brazil and Indonesia. So whilst the UK finance sector punches above its weight, which is something we're all proud of, it also unfortunately punches above its weight in carbon emissions too. And we did a separate report looking at what that footprint was in terms of carbon emissions from the UK. And actually, if you put it together, just one subset of UK banks and asset managers was equivalent to 1.8 times the net emissions. So if you put the UK finance sector, that's about in terms of countries, we'd be about 9th in the world. So when we do get that criticism of only 1% of emissions, if we factor in what our global footprint is and the finance sector, it's much bigger. But that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for us to lead the way and to reduce our emissions. So we're on the cusp of seeing the government's UK net zero strategy. We're all very excited for that. We're asking people to sign up to a land charter, come to our stall down around the corner. We've got the environmental land management scheme that I'm sure we'll hear from Minette about, making sure we do tackle that nexus at the same time, emissions, nature, people and food. There's lots of enthusiasm for new markets, carbon offsetting, but we need to make sure they're really well regulated to make sure that those who are participating are going to be getting credit where credit is actually due. And we want to see that shift dial at the CSR coming up at the same time. There's 2 really exciting things that we're very much hoping the Chancellor will bring forward. And as I was just saying to Guy, he's got the best brief, because actually if we could align the finance sector, the whole of the finance sector to Paris, that would just be incredible. We do have the world-leading TCFD. That's great, but it's a bit like, when you go to have a pizza box and it's got the calories on, well, that's useful, but it doesn't really mean you get a weight loss plan at the same time. So we're saying mandatory action plans for all of our finance sector. We have a level playing field, mandatory action plans. It's going to happen. Let's get the UK ahead of it. And last ask, we want to have a net zero test. So all government spending is aligned with those commitments. So we don't focus on one bit of brown spending or green spending at either end. We look at the whole piece overall, and we're aligning our finance. So the finance system is working both public and private to deliver on our nature and climate commitments.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. 3 minutes. Ruth.
Thank you so much. So when I was little, protecting the rainforest was probably like the first political political issue I was ever really engaged with. My sort of innocent 8-year-old self just couldn't really comprehend why anybody would want to destroy these magical forests full of incredible animals. And obviously the answer, as we all know, that didn't occur to me when I was 8, is money, because the destruction of nature can bring much greater financial reward in the immediate term, but it's setting the stage for financial disaster in the medium to long term. So we need to find ways to incentivize economic activity that preserves nature, that can exist in balance with the resources that nature can provide, but also economic activity that restores it. The Dasgupta review identified 3 types of capital. Produced capital, so infrastructure like roads, ports, machinery; human capital, health, skills, knowledge; and natural capital, so the plants, animals, processes that make up our ecosystems. And whilst produced capital has doubled and human capital has grown by 13% in recent years, we've lost 40% of what Dasgupta terms our natural capital. Imagine if we'd lost 40% of our produced capital or our human capital. I just don't think we would still be having conversations where we had to justify taking urgent action to restore it, or the cost of doing so. But yet we're still having to do that with natural capital, despite the fact that produced capital and human capital are utterly dependent on it. Our economy, our society is embedded in the biosphere. So what are our options? We've got laws, regulation, and taxation to incentivize behavior change, use of public money, but importantly, use of public money to direct private capital towards activities that restore nature and tackle climate change, because the cost is just far too big to be borne by the public sector alone. And I think the UK's work to tackle deforestation is a really good example of using these different levers. The UK's been working since 2012 to sort of tackle deforestation where it comes to products that are particularly egregious, like palm oil. So the UK Roundtable on Sourcing Sustainable Palm Oil brought together UK businesses with government and supported them to transition to fully sustainable palm oil. We've gone from, I think, 16% use of sustainable palm oil in 2010 up to 70% in 2019, so we're not fully there yet, but that's great progress. And I think also the commitments we've seen in the environment bill around making it illegal for UK businesses to use agricultural commodities if they've not been produced in line with local laws on forests. That's fantastic. That's something that I've been lobbying for. And also, I think we've seen really good use of public money and private capital through international climate finance. Started in 2011, lots of it's been directed towards forest and land use programs, such as the Partnerships for Forest programme. We know that the UK's committed to doubling its international climate finance to 11.6 billion over the next 4 years, and this includes programmes that aim to reduce emissions from deforestation and land use, so we expect it to attract as much as £850 million in private investment. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I'm going to leave my second example, which was electric vehicles, and we'll go over that later. But I think we have made a really good start in lots of different areas. There is a lot more work to do. There's some really interesting opportunities around sort of pricing carbon, doing lots of work at national and international level, and it's a really exciting time to be having this conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And finally, Minette.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today. I feel like I'm used to sort of speaking before dinner or before lunch, and with Guy leaving at 5, I sort of feel like I'm standing between you and a very nice meal. So I'll be very quick. You're on the menu. Look, I feel we are at a moment of enormous opportunity, but the stakes, if I'm honest, feel quite high. Back in 2019, when I can remember being at the Oxford Farming Conference, and to a certain extent this was to attract Michael Gove's attention, to say, if we're going to deliver for nature, if we're going to deliver for the environment, we've got to get the food production bit right. So, hey, we are here, and this is really exciting. So we laid down the gauntlet to achieve net zero 10 years in advance of government by 2040. And I am really, really passionate about it, because we can do it. Agriculture is one sector, 10% of emissions, that is a source of emissions and a sink. And we absolutely know that we can get there. And this is incredibly important when we look to the future. A whole new policy, all the old rule books ripped up from the past, and a chance, I believe, to provide a global first. And if we are serious, which we all are in this room, and I hope everybody is, about the challenges of climate change, then farmers are the solution. Whether you see farmers as the enemy or the solution, they are the only solution out there, because they are farming the vast majority of the world's land. So we've got to do it smarter, we've got to do it better, we've got to farm on less land with less inputs, and the new technologies and the new innovations, the big game-changing tickets, are what I believe is really going to put the UK back on the global stage. We've done it with AMR, antimicrobial resistance. We must still do it with antimicrobial resistance, but the big ticket item is getting to the carbon neutral world of food production, and that will be the game changer. My frustration at the moment is nature-based solutions is an important third of getting to that journey. There are other really challenging areas, and the policies that are needed across government, not just sitting on poor DEFRA's lap, across government, opportunities to get there are essential. And getting the policy right for the future is absolutely fundamental to each and every one of us. Now, within ELMS, the Sustainable Farming Incentive, if we get that platform right, if we can create ladders for farmers to scale, because some are up here and some are not even on the first rung of the ladder. So we've got to have ladders for these farmers to scale and scale quickly. We get that platform right and we allow the opportunities of stacking effectively. This is where you bring the public and the private sector together. And I would highlight carbon. We've also got to face into the problem of carbon border adjustment taxes. It is no good if we just sit here doing the right thing and just export our standards and our production abroad. So carbon, biodiversity, net gain, water quality, and I would bring in access to that as well. And I am, on my farm, working on a whole catchment basis in a super cluster, 55,000 hectares, that has come together to trade in those areas. So this will be the new farming of the future. Yes, you will have your food production. That will always remain absolutely front and centre of what a farmer does. But a farmer will be producing fibres. They will be producing green energies. They will be producing things that we are not just eating, that we are living from. And I put it to you as my sort of closing comment on all of this. We cannot keep robbing the finite resources that are irreplaceable out of our world. We can't keep doing it. The UK has the chance to be able to show how we can grow things sustainably on the earth to live our lives differently to how we have led them in the past. And all those other things, nature is the main beneficiary. But if we don't do that and we don't get every bit of this jigsaw right, we will lose a massive opportunity of resetting the UK on the global stage. I wish I tried to excite Michael Gove back then, and whether I did or not with trying to achieve net zero is another matter. Maybe it's still a work in progress. But I really hope that government can see that effectively the jewel in its crown, but it's got to spread beyond just nature-based solutions, because that is vital. But if you don't get the other bits right, you can't deliver for nature.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. We're going to go on to questions in a minute, but I just want to pick up one point that's come through. It strikes me with this whole subject and this debate, it's something everybody agrees with at a conceptual level, and everybody goes, yeah, of course, and nods and says this is all fantastic. I think there's kind of two areas that I'm really intrigued in. First of all, I want to pick up what Katie said about to Guy around the need for mandatory action plans for businesses to get behind the greenwash of a lot of corporate activity and commitments being made. I want to say net zero by 2040, or we're going to offset everything, or we're going to have biodiversity net gain. What does that actually mean? And then I'm sort of really intrigued to explore, well, literally, what are the mechanisms? How do you actually know that the right thing is being done? Right? Because it strikes me that that's a really difficult question, is how do you actually create the right frameworks that conceptually we all agree, but actually then don't result in perverse consequences that we're not ready for or work at the local level. So Guy, should we come back to you first?
So, sorry, bear with me. So I have to say I agree with pretty much everything that has been said on this panel, but I think Minette made the point which actually defeats Katie's argument, which when she said farmers are the solution, but farmers are going at different levels and different paces. And some are really ready to go to net zero very, very quickly, and others aren't. If you were to mandate all farmers to go immediately within 2 years to X, Y, or Z level, they simply could not do it. And what you would do is, that is the policy effectively of divestment. It is a disaster, and it would actually be self-defeating to the objectives that we all wish to achieve. Now, the practical reality is that if we all want to get to net zero, there are a whole host of farmers is one example, different bits of government is another example, businesses, another example, and individual pension schemes and money you invest with different organizations who are going at different paces. Now, what you want is you want proper reporting. We're now doing that. So TCFD, climate-related financial disclosure, is actually taking place. So you, the consumer, are now in charge. You actually can find out what it is your investments, what it is government is doing on your behalf. The second bit is you want people to have a plan for net zero. And that will happen at different paces. So let's take the extreme example. A very, very environmentally friendly organization will be going very, very quickly, but Shell or BP are clearly going to move much more slowly. They've got to go there, but trying to allow them to get there at pace, but they can't do it divestment straight away. Because if you get divestment, and this is why we have to push back against this argument, we are not going to solve this by everybody divesting from products and merely saying, we just got to do a mandatory disposal of all things within 2 years, because you just end up with nobody inventing all the products we need. All the tech that Minette is right to outline is going to come not from business. I'd love to say that Kwasi is sat in a laboratory somewhere, or George Eustace is sat in a laboratory somewhere, going to produce all these things like, you know, hydrogen fuel cells, like capacity for carbon capture and storage, like capacity in respect of clean steel. It's not going to come from government. It's going to have to come from businesses who we're going to have to work with in a partnership. And that would be the key message I'd like to get across, certainly.
Katie.
Guy, I agree with you on divestment entirely. I think so. Just to explain a bit more. So, we are sat at WWF. I get net zero plans sent to me a lot, all day, every day. Some of them are outstanding, absolutely outstanding. You think these companies have pulled it out of the bag. They've thought of ideas. They're brilliant. Other ones, I'm embarrassed that they've pressed send. They are pathetic, and I think it's for us as a sort of constituency, government, NGOs, who can say this is what good looks like. And we need to make sure we've got integrity in the system, because you can have net zero anywhere. Nobody really knows what that means. So I think at this stage, where we've got all of this excitement, the run up to COP26, and we've got all of these businesses falling over themselves, we need to say, this is what good looks like. And you're absolutely right. You don't want to just pull out of everything, because that's not, we need to make sure we're having that transition. But what we're saying is, it's not just about putting forward your calories on the front of your box. You need to commit that you will have a plan. Now, that plan for some people will be, you know, really trailblazing. For other people, it will take longer, and they will have to rely on different netting off things and whatever. So it's not saying what that plan should be, but we should take the opportunity. And also, we're going to miss out for the UK. The Americans are really pushing. They've got their own TCFD. If we don't make
Ours is better.
Well, it might be better, but if we don't make sure and take the next step, and Mark Carney did a really good job of going forward and saying TCFD, now it's mandatory. Let's just push on. Businesses are crying out for it. We've got loads of corporates going, yes, please, yes, please. So I think it's a case of those two things can be totally aligned together, but let's take advantage of this political opportunity, you know, and let's use it, and let's say what good looks like, and get and call out, you know, the companies that are really pushing it on, and say to the other ones that shouldn't have pressed send, back to the drawing board.
Yeah, no one disputes that. I mean, I think TCFD, you shouldn't go away thinking the Americans are better. Not that they aren't better at some things. We are the first country in the world to put TCFD in law on the 1st of October, by the way. So pre-COP, we are the first country. Boris and Alok will be able to stand up at COP and say, you want to know how you're going to put the consumer in charge? Climate-related financial disclosures, there's only one country in the world that's done it, in law, regulated, right here, right now, it is this country. The second bit is that, so we are working, so all of government, and to be fair, the entire world is working on basically Paris alignment, which is effectively the measurement of your emissions vis-a-vis whether you are Paris aligned. Now, that is exceptionally techie and difficult work, and to be fair, different organizations, different countries, EU, US, Saudi, other countries are looking at this in different ways. And measurement of that is, frankly, at the moment, impossible to provide a uniform approach, all right? However, one of the things out of COP that we must all be hoping is what is called green taxonomy, what is called proper stewardship ability in respect to Paris alignment will emerge from that. And I think that is something that where there is a lot of work being done going forward, and which genuinely is something that we should all be getting behind. Sorry, I went on far too long, I apologise.
That's fine. I mean, I'm just saying, Minette or Ruth, if you want to come in on that. Otherwise, I'm going to attempt to ask Minette a question, which is, that's fine, but does the sort of TCFD framework as you see it, do you think that is actually going to drive practical changes within the UK farming community? Or do you think it's largely operating at a sort of city level, and actually for farmers who are operating farms today, making decisions on what to plant next year, whether actually this is all just a sort of slightly otherworldly finance conversation, and whether it's translating through to the farmer on the ground?
Look, everything that Guy has said is to be applauded, but it's
Stop there.
you're not going till I've finished. But exactly, it's very deeply complex, and I mean all the conversations on labour at the moment, access to labour, are all being driven by well we all need to pay more, and then before you know it, you're talking about we all need to pay more for the food that we eat, and this is, I guess, primarily the challenge that the world faces, in that everybody wants access to high quality, affordable food. And how do we deal with that? Because everything stems from that one point. And to a certain extent, I feel these are shark-infested waters. Applaud the government on what it is doing there. But, you know, the whole situation with carbon, the value, the global value of carbon, and how we are going to be trading it, getting those values to come back to the soil effectively, because we've seen with food production, you know, you've got farmers who now take only less than 8% out of the value chain. That is unsustainable in itself. And if we are serious about this, we've got to get better returns back into the land, so the money is going back into the land and is delivering. There's a real danger at the moment as we look to effectively massage our CSR, that it is actually pretty dishonest, and that the consumer is effectively getting ripped off. So this is really difficult stuff, because the moment you end up in this area, you start talking about food inflation, and that basically kills the conversation. So we need a real global rethink, and this is WTO and stuff as well. But if we don't do it, we are not going to make progress. And I think what antimicrobial resistance does show us is that there is a global ambition. It was David Cameron who set out this challenge to lead the world in AMR. All of these things are doable, but they are really difficult. And I worry at the moment that it is an element of greenwash. It isn't serious enough, and there are moving parts that have to come together in order to deliver on it.
Okay, Ruth, do you want to come in on this?
Sure. I agree it is a difficult situation, because we're going to get, if we don't take action, we're going to get food inflation anyway, in that we already use, I think it's something like 1.6, we need 1.6 Earths to sustain our needs generally, not just for food. And we are seeing, which is a good thing, living standards rise in the developing world. More people will need access to food, to good quality food. So if we don't take action, we're going to be in that bind. But similarly, taking action does have those costs. So it is a really complex issue. It's one we need to work carefully on. I do think the TCFD will do a lot to helping drive clarity. It is quite prescriptive. And I think there is a lot of power in consumer power. I think probably environment, food standards is one of the things that my constituents contact me on, probably more than any other issue. If I was to sort of collate my inbox into like the big mega issues, environmental issues, and the sustainability impact of different companies would probably be one of the biggest ones. So I do think there's a lot of power there. There's a lot of power in helping people to be better informed about where they're putting their money.
Thank you. That's really, I think we can come back. We've got the Minister for one more minute, and so I'm just really keen that if anybody's got a question from the audience that they want to fire to the Pensions Minister before he has to shoot off, then please do. I've got, lady in the green in the middle.
Thank you so much. Guy. Thank you, Les. Guy, it would be great to know your thoughts on what Katie said about a net zero test for the government.
So I think So I think the 10-point plan and the work we're doing on COP will be the best guide for that and the work that we're going forward. I'm not sure the specifics of what Alok is doing in this space, but I'm quite sure he can answer it for you. But the bottom line is this, is that whether you look at the 10-point plan, whether you look at the COP work, the one thing I would say to take away from this, I cannot overstate to you the degree to which COP is driving government and is the most important thing in government. I mean, people say, oh, there's the pandemic and there's this and there's that. It is so interconnected to every single part of government at the moment leading up to it. And you guys don't necessarily see it, but we see it as ministers, the degree to which the second most important minister, without a shadow of a doubt, with no disrespect to Rishi, very important man obviously, is Alok Sharma. Without any shadow of a doubt, he is driving forward government in a way that is fascinating to see. And it is, you know, I bow to him on all these matters though.
Good. Okay, well, I think we're going to have to let you go. Okay. 5 o'clock. Thank you very much for your time. I want to come back to this question of consumers that I think is really important that's come through on this, and consumer trust in the process that we're in at the moment on all of this, because I think there is a deep level there. What do you think are the biggest, I'll start with you, Katie, what do you think are the biggest risks to consumer trust in this whole nature, I mean, basically it's the sort of nature, climate, food nexus, isn't it? It's the problem we're talking about. But what do you think are those biggest risks to consumer trust in that? Because I think if we lose consumer trust, especially if COP26 doesn't go so well, then the political challenges on the other side of into next year might be quite great on that basis.
Yeah, and it's a big issue. I think where we can sort of applaud ourselves in the UK is that we do have a certain amount of cross-party consensus, which I think was sort of, as you said, reflected in this panel, in that we actually have a clear view on what we're, but in a way we're getting to the hard bit now of how. Do you know what I mean? Like, and how are we actually going to get to that? I think it's interesting, and you know, Ruth said around consumer power, and consumer power for me is really important. But there's a couple of things that Benet and I have been in the green movement for about 20 years, and there's a couple of things that when you've been around for 20 years you start to see. One is around voluntary and mandatory, and I used to be at Friends of the Earth many years ago with some colleagues in the audience, and we used to go to Europe and lobby around the emission standards for cars, and the vehicle companies were like, it's just not possible, it's absolutely not possible, it's not possible, 120 grams of CO2, it's not possible. And it was voluntary, and it was just kick the can down the road, kick the can. They went mandatory, and it just flipped. It just absolutely flipped. And there was a little bit of magic from Elon Musk, but apart from that, it was around mandatory action. And it was actually like, you know, it was a bit like, oh, is this really political, mandatory, voluntary? Is it really? But actually, it's kind of just saves a lot of time. And actually, the science just tells us we don't actually really have that much time. Let's set the level playing field. Let's do this. And therefore, it goes on to my point about consumers. Consumers have a certain amount of cognitive load. We all have, you know, I've got kids, I've got, you know, what's in the school bag, you know, what's for dinner, what's whatever. You've got a certain amount of cognitive load to determine of what you're doing. And when I'm in the supermarket, I'm absolutely baffled. Do you know what I mean? It's like, do I get the blueberries that have been flown over? But hold on a second, that's about my kids. You know, the choices in your head, can't have food waste, can't have meat, you know, all these sort of things. Actually, we just want to make it as easy as possible for consumers. So the more we can help at the end of ensuring integrity within the system, it then just makes it easier as well for consumers to do the right thing. So I think we've got to be really careful about just saying, oh, over to you, Sonny, go and look at TCFD, because we're never going to do that. I'm not going to do that, and this is my life's work. So in terms of how do we make sure we say what good looks like, and we encourage, and then we can have as much integrity in the system. And don't, you know, this is a journey for all of us. WWF is one of the only NGOs that works really closely with corporates, and we're trying to make sure that we do say what good looks like, and that's a journey as well. So I think, you know, let's work together, but let's also learn the lessons, because time is ticking.
Ruth?
Yeah, I think there's certainly scope for looking at predefined metrics and requiring businesses to report against them. It's something that we've been discussing certainly in the cybersecurity sector that I used to work in for years, in terms of making people be more transparent about what levels of security they have. But I do want to be a little bit conscious about painting business as the bad guy, because a lot of the businesses I work with are the good guys and are driving the innovation that is going to enable us to get to net zero. And just to give you a little example, I've campaigned quite a lot to bring forward the the phase-out target for petrol and diesel cars to 2030. I'm very pleased that's now happening. And we did, have some companies say, oh, it will be impossible. Well, it will have to be possible because there are loads of other countries in the world where you're not going to be able to sell them after 2030, so presumably you'll manage it in the UK as well. But I spoke to JCB, who were concerned. Obviously, they have huge, big sort of construction vehicles. Just to cut a long story short, electric batteries on those, that's going to be an absolute nightmare. So what did they do? In the time that they first contacted me in the summer and between, I think it was sort of 6 months later, January the following year, they now have it's gone beyond a prototype, a pre-production hydrogen combustion engine working in diggers in their machines in their test quarry up in Staffordshire. So there are people doing amazing things, and I would be very, very nervous about being drawn into a dialogue where it's something we're doing to business. It's something we're doing for business. And actually, to be quite blunt about it, it is in the self-interest of businesses to get away from assets stranded in climate risk. They have a huge opportunity here. We have a huge opportunity as a country to create millions of jobs in high-skilled industries, to really sort of lead the charge with new industries here. So I do think we have a great opportunity, and that's what we need to be focused on.
Risks of consumers not losing faith in this?
Well, there are always enormous risks with consumers losing faith, and particularly around food. I mean, if you wanted to lose your job in government in the past, you were involved in MAF or DEFRA, and you're pretty much guaranteed that you would lose it at some stage. And ultimately, we have transformed the food system on the back of scares. It was nothing like a food safety scare to drive mass concern, and we saw it most recently with Horsegate. It really does paralyse a country, and it terrifies people, and rightly so. So I think, I guess I'm going to sort of say something slightly different here. For me, all roads lead back to education, and I sort of wonder now, as we look at what we are, with an obesity crisis, wasting £16 billion worth of food, and we're not teaching anything about it. So I would be very biased and say agriculture should be part of STEM learning, because I think it does really, really help children to learn practically about how their food is produced, but also how to care for the environment and how to stop wasting £16 billion worth of food. I'm challenged so often on the £3 billion worth that we invest in the vast proportion of the country. And I think, well, if you just saved quarter or dealt with quarter of the issue of food waste, we'd have the budget. So I think we have to go backwards, effectively, to go forwards. And consumer trust, an informed consumer, is what we want. That is what we all want to see, because an informed consumer will make the right choices. And that ultimately is what we need to see.
I'm sort of conscious that this debate is about finance in nature, and we're now into a slightly different area around consumer trust, which is appalling chairmanship on there. But I'm sort of tempted just to push back on you. There is a danger that by saying we need informed consumers, that you're putting the onus for change back onto the consumer rather than the system. So you could say, on the one hand, okay, let's improve consumer education. I don't disagree with you, by the way. I think we do need consumer trust. But you could say, all we need to do is that. Or you could say, actually, we need to stop dairy farmers feeding any imported soya into their feed in the UK in the next 5 years, and they need to transition away from all soya and farming in the UK in the next 5 years. In terms of global nature, I wonder which of those two would have the best impact on nature in the timescales we're working with.
Well, you've got to have both. If we are going to challenge, effectively, if we are going to speak truth to power, you have to have a well-informed consumer to challenge the government of the day and what is needed. If they're not well-informed, they can't challenge, and they can't make those important choices. On the soya point, look, this is, I never thought I'd be in the camp of saying the opportunities of Brexit, but I am now, because that is where we are, and we have to look at the opportunities. So to deliver on circular economies and be producing our own protein sources here is absolutely where we must go. So to your point on dairy cows in 5 years' time, I would love it, but we've got to incentivise that change. We've got to be able to legislate for that change so that it can happen, so that we can create these totally circular economies where we are not reliant on degradation in other parts of the world that effectively we are importing here. But this is all, again, comes with a policy that is joined up across government. And my biggest worry at the moment is that we are in different camps in many different places. We've got to bring this together and look at it in the round. If there is, what I will say is with COP27, it's in Africa. And it will be about food security and how we produce our food. So if we all want legacy, which we desperately want, every one of us, out of this COP, it's let's look to the next COP and where that is going. That, I believe, is our opportunity.
Could I just add to that? I think one of the reasons it's so important we have informed consumers is because we have to bring people with us. We've all talked about difficult choices that we have to make. We talked about sometimes choices that are going to cost money. We have technology improving. There's lots of ways in which we can get to net zero, but it will require some lifestyle changes on our part. Minette's talked about food waste. Global food waste is catastrophic, like absolutely catastrophic. If you look at the fast fashion industry and the impact that has on the world, I just don't think it is sustainable for us to find a way to keep that sort of very throwaway lifestyle that we've developed. So the reason that I think we need to have people informed is because we've got to bring the majority of people with us. And people always say to me, oh, do you think, these Extinction Rebellion or Insulate Britain are very helpful? And I say no, because the majority of people in my constituency look at them and think, what bloody hell are you doing? There's not going to bring the majority of people with us, and that's what we really need to focus on, because if we don't have that buy-in, we're really going to struggle to make any effective change.
I totally agree. Sorry, just wanted to clarify, when I talked before about cognitive load, I think it's around we have to do a whole lifestyle shift, and I totally agree that we want to bring everybody with us on that journey. It's a case of all the things we need to do and shift and all the sectors, because to get to net zero, it's every single sector. It's food, it's EVs, and the EV drivers were feeling pretty smug last week and this week. But,
I know, I am one.
Me too. But so
no one else is speaking to me.
So the smug EV drivers here, we're all right. But every single sector, and we talk about fashion, we talk about homes, if every single one of those, we need to think about which is as well as bringing people on the broad journey, which is the element we need to sort of bring them in. Because actually, when you do polling, a lot of people are, the stats now on climate change are incredible in terms of, it's the top 3 issue in every single demographic of concern. But also you say, what are you doing? And everything said, well, I'm doing a lot because I'm recycling. And you're like, hold on a second, we don't have that weighted, we have no concept. We do have a problem with education, but which piece do we want to inform? So I think it's around taking it to the next level where we can take the consumer out and make it really easy for them. Let's do that, in terms of where they don't need to be involved, and we can set the standards to let British businesses free, and you're right, come up with some amazing solutions. Let's do that. And then for the areas we have to get them involved, let's all sort of work together. But in terms of communications, you're right. I think the government spent more on SALT communications than on climate change, which is quite incredible. Do you know what I mean? You're about, like, if this is the, end of humanity, you'd think we can possibly have a bit more education spend on it than on SALT.
Okay, very good. Right, well, I'm tempted to throw it back out to the audience again and encourage anybody who's got any questions they may want to put to our panel today. Gentleman in the white shirt.
Lewis from British Soft Drinks.
Sorry, just say that again.
Lewis van der Gaal, British Soft Drinks Association. We've gone down the route of talking about consumers. Wonder if you might give me your views on eco-labelling or carbon labelling consumer-facing.
Minette, you're reacting there. Putting yourself in the firing line to answer first.
Look, what we have, and that we should be very proud of, is certification initiatives like Bed Tractor, RSPCA, Soil Association, that mean that the shopper in retail is pretty well informed if they want to be, and they can choose to make an investment as to whether they want higher welfare, whether they want British, on the back of that. Where what you are talking about does not work is the out-of-home market. And we really have, which is 50% of the value of the food market. We tend to think, all of us, that everything is retail. Well, it has been during COVID, but it is not normally, and it is going back, thank goodness, to not that again. Now, this is where I think the abuse is happening now, and the abuse stands a chance of being off the scale as we negotiate wider trade deals with abuse of power. And, I've seen it, in my own locality. My neighbour provides our local pub with great British beef, and she actually said to the landlord, where do you get your pork from? Thinking, well, that'll be from the next door farm. And he said, oh no, all our meat's local, pork comes from Booker's. And so straight out of Denmark, because they don't sell any British pork. And this is the trouble with 50% of the market. They can say whatever they want to say, and nobody is there to give any checks and balances to it. So I sort of agree with it, but I think the certification schemes are the route, because then it is honest, it is audited right the way through independently, so the consumer can know that actually it is what it says on the pack. It is honest because it's had that journey. In the out-of-home market, you haven't got a cat and hell's chance of knowing now. And unless we have something like a Food Act or something else that brings greater honesty to what is going on in the out-of-home market, that people are just going to get ripped off and they won't know. And that is the danger. And you've seen what I said, shark-infested waters. There are sharks out there who are harvesting false data that ultimately is not completely honest, and the consumer stands getting ripped off. Back to the consumer trust point, that's why you need a well-informed consumer.
Katie?
Minette's expert on this in terms of we are looking at labelling, because I think that but the market is now sort of slightly overwhelmed with labelling, isn't it? And there's a lot coming through. And now you can go onto supermarket apps and sort by labelling, which is interesting. So I think it's really interesting. We were in a slightly watching brief of how do you do that, and how do you as well bring forward the carbon emissions reductions that we need, and the nature-friendly farming at the same time with a just transition. How do you do it all and make sure you've got a label that does that? So we're in a slightly watching brief, but we are very interested to see whether this and what the evidence base is on shifting.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is to say, look, I agree. I like having, personally, I love the fact that we have lots of information around health and nutrients and stuff on packaging now. I should really probably take notice of it on more occasions, but at least I can if I want to. But I think the tricky thing is as Minette's saying, for the out-of-home market. But what we would need is a sort of agreed taxonomy of what counts towards a carbon footprint, because you've got where a product's produced, how a product's produced, how it's transported, how far it's transported for, how it's stored, how that storage is powered. Then if we're talking about restaurant, how is it then produced? So you've got a lot of quite complex information factoring into what needs to be quite a simple metric for people to understand. So I think that would be the key challenge.
And I think the other question, of course, is how do you ensure that the finance flows are then playing through to actually ensure behaviours can then change on the ground. Thank you. I had a question just in the middle with the man with the hand up there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Robert Sheasby from the Agricultural Industries Confederation. The AIC has prepared a roadmap to help our members find their way to 2050. But there are a number of things that challenge us as well. Part of that is understanding retailer challenges. So take the route of a retailer that struggled to remove palm oil a couple of years ago. Working out that you need to source proteins locally, as local to market as you need. So be aware of the consequences. If you want to incentivize homegrown protein production, as Minette mentioned earlier, what are the consequences to local markets and export markets that flow from that impact on a UK marketplace? So just having that balanced approach to avoid disinvestment and divestment in the coming years is absolutely critical, and I'd like the panel to have that in mind when thinking about the consequences of the actions they're proposing.
I think everybody agrees with you on that, probably. No?
Yeah, I mean, what we should say, for the benefit of everything that AIC does, is it sources sustainably. So when we tend to talk about soy and soya, the fact that we are, and I still don't know whether the UK has signed up to the, I believe, Amsterdam Declaration, that was incredibly important. AIC have been totally committed to that. I think it was up for grabs as to whether the government was going to or not. So what we are sourcing going forwards, we've got to make sure that that we are honourable to our true aims. And I think that would be a concern for Rob, and it would be a massive concern for me, and I'm sure everybody in this room.
I can confirm we have signed that, and it is verified by my non-political friend here.
I would never describe Katie White as non-political, just for the record, having worked with her for 20 years, just on that basis. The person who got the Climate Change Act through, by the way, which is where the MBE comes from. Well, she deserves it very well. But I think just on the labelling part, to declare an interest, because I used to run sustainability for Waitrose on this point as well within supermarkets, and the challenges of getting this stuff out of supply chains is huge. And I think this is where it does come back to some of the financing. And I think what's really interesting, actually, because there are some costs and complexities with moving supply chains over from one to the other. And one of the reasons why I think the financing is so important is because it can then help drive change. The challenge is that the financing largely, well, last time I experienced it, there was an awful lot of just lip service and greenwashing and tick boxing going on within this financing space. So, you know, we would try and negotiate, well, we did renegotiate, say, a loan facility that the John Lewis Partnership might have. Not that we needed it particularly, but we always had the facility. We'd try and put green criteria on it, then trying to find those criteria that were really, really measurable and deliverable is really quite tricky, and you get to the few numbers. Actually, interestingly, RSPO certification was one of them that you could get to, because you could actually say, yes, I've got enough certificates. Yeah. But the only way that you could actually do it in a verifiable way was to fall back to a mass balance solution that probably wasn't driving a huge amount of change in the market. So there's some real challenges of complexity, but I think we can't ignore the practical over there and this need to get the financing right at the high level as part of that, as a key conclusion. I had another question at the back, the gentleman at the back.
Charles Seaford from Demos. I think there's agreement that we need a better informed public. Beyond certification, who's going to do that informing? Is it government? Is it business? Is it a partnership between government and business? I wonder what the panel think about how that would work.
Okay, we're going to have Minette and Katie, you can tell us what you want, then Ruth, you can answer for the government.
Well, to a certain extent, all of that is sort of up for grabs at the moment. And I guess my frustration with the whole focus on labelling, I can see DEFRA colleagues in the back, so this isn't aimed at them, but my frustration with labelling is a lot of these things should be resolved at the negotiating table and not here, and not by consumer choice, because, you know, the government has committed very robustly in areas around standards of not undermining farmers in this country in trade deals, and making sure that consumers are not disadvantaged as well. So I think there is a massive role right now, right here, right now, for government, because I'm not negotiating trade deals. How I wish I was, but I'm not. Because if I was, I would not be doing it like this. And I would not have just given everything away on a plate to Australia, which, by the way, was nothing to do with DEFRA colleagues either. But my goodness, what a mistake that is. And there are a few closing remnants of ashes, effectively, that we can hopefully extinguish by getting things like carcass balance equivalence in place and a longer term safeguard. But, you know, yeah, I am sort of enormously frustrated by the current situation, because that is going to affect things for years to come. So yes, the industry, it's in the industry's interests. I mean, you know, that's why when things like Horsegate happens, everybody reacts, and the food system in this country is much, much better on the back of it. Everybody then started investing in their supply chains, and the buzzword was short, safe, secure supply chains. And, you know, McDonald's and others, the reason why they were able to come straight back online straight after lockdown, John Lewis, all of them, was because they'd invested in those supply chains. As we go forward and negotiate trade deals, quite honestly, we haven't got a blimmin' clue what is going to be coming here. We haven't got a clue how much is going to be coming here, but we know it's going to be a lot. And how we're going to police it is yet to be defined. So I'd love to think that industry was going to have a massive stake in this, but ultimately the market will define it. The market will decide. And so right now, it's government's job. Everything rests with them. The opportunities, the challenges, and the threats sit on their desk. So we can only, which is my job, obviously, to influence and hope that we get it right.
Thank you. Just to back Minette up on the trade deals, because I think it's an area where we are totally aligned, which is you know, in some senses, WWF and NFU are not always bedfellows, but it's somewhere where we're totally aligned, and it seems such a wasted opportunity. I mean, it really does. We could have created, you know, in so many other areas of government, as Guy said, COP and everything else is moving areas forward, and then we've just in the back door letting these trade deals, and for what? Anyhow, we will leave the trade debate, but in answer to Charles's question, I'd really like us to learn the lessons of COVID. The climate and nature crisis is far more threatening to our whole species than COVID is. And we had an incredible response in terms of global, you know, cooperation, in terms of communication, in terms of businesses, in terms of local groups' response to that. I think it'd be great if we could learn the lessons and try and transform some of that to tackling the climate and nature crisis.
So I really like your analogy about the using the sort of COVID model in terms of getting messaging across, because I think what we saw there, we saw very strong communication from government in the UK and other countries too. We saw very strong action from sort of social media companies, lots of media companies to try and promote that. We saw sort of civil society, we saw celebrities, we saw lots of people getting involved in trying to reach communities that were perhaps, when it came to vaccines, vaccine hesitant. So I think we've got a really strong model there for working around when it comes to climate legislation. I also think education is really key. Most schools that I go to now, it's one of the issues that children raise with me. Certainly when I was back at school, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I don't think that it was on sort of the agenda anywhere near so much. So I think we have got some really good opportunities there.
Great. Do we have any other questions from the room? In which case, what I will do is ask everybody if they just want to make their last final comments, and then we'll wrap up this particular session today. And I think if I may, just with a specific focus on the importance of with that view on the finances and how much we can unlock. What would you like to see the government do? There's one thing we haven't talked about, which is the task force on nature-related financial disclosures and the role that might play as well. For those in the audience, this is another initiative. So if you have climate-related financial disclosures, the TCFDs, do you then have nature-related financial disclosures around that, recognizing that nature and climate are not the same thing as they go forward within that. But just thinking specifically around, so how do, for Minette, if I may put as a question, you know, how do we finance the farmers to make this transition? Because a lot of farmers will find that very tricky right now within that spirit. How do we, Katie, within supply chains, do that? And perhaps really politically, how do we get that financing to work? For some final comments. Minette, I'll start with you.
Well, this is why it is so important that we get this right, because under the CAP, agriculture was part of a multi-annual budget. Well, great, because it kept it away from everybody else. So you had the whole of the farming sector in blissful ignorance of what is going on in the NHS, policing, education, everything else, because they lived in their bubble of the multi-annual budget. Well, forget that. We are now in the bear pit with everybody else fighting for those funds. So it's got to be one hell of a policy that stacks up for the public purse. That's the first thing. So we've got to get this right. We've got to spend time getting it right. And I think it's going to be a massive challenge because we've spent all the money. So I believe we've got to come together, to your point, on the farmers that are on the ladder, the farmers that are at the top, and the farmers that aren't on the ladder. We must be able to incentivize and at pace. So we must be able to reward people climbing the ladder, and the ladder is essential. If you just focus on the bottom rung of the ladder, people will stay on the bottom rung of the ladder. If you focus on the top rung of the ladder, the people who aren't on the bottom rung will never be able to get there. So you've got to incentivize at pace. You've got to get your sustainable farming platform right and deliverable, and you want to have GB, we'll leave Northern Ireland out of this for the time being, but you want to have framework agreed. That is important as well. If you get that bit right, then you have your opportunity. You bring your public and your private sector together. You deal with your new trades on biodiversity net gain, on carbon, on water quality. And that becomes a way forwards, really investing in nature and really delivering for nature. But if you don't do that, if you don't allow the principle of stacking, and this would be very, very different to the CAP, and we all know Treasury will not continue to back direct support. And I think it has been hard to justify, but we've got a chance now to do it very differently. But we are going to have to work harder, be better, deliver more, which is the whole reason for us with committing to net zero, because it is right that the public expects more, but it's not for the public purse alone. This has got to bring the private sector in, and this then, I believe, delivers the global opportunity of what the future can look like. What you saw going on in Australia with Microsoft is not, and it's funny, actually, the Australians are pretty anti that as well, because it's not completely honest in how it's working. Trading in those areas on biodiversity, getting it back into the investment, back into nature, back into the soil is, I think, the key for the future. But it needs a partnership approach. That's the point. You can't do it with an either or. It needs WWF, it needs the NFU, it needs government, it needs everybody to work together on what the future needs to look like.
Brilliant. Thank you. Katie.
Thank you. I guess just to take us back, I mean, our economy and our lives are based on natural capital. So it's all very well, but we're like, it's not just a nice little fluffy thing on the side, like the chair you sat on, the food you're eating, the air you're breathing. We wouldn't be alive, and we wouldn't be able to have our lifestyles in any format without natural capital. So it's a massive market failure that it's not that all of these negative externalities are not priced in. So we've got to find a way of changing our system in order that we can continue with our lifestyle or have lifestyle in a way that we all flourish. So we've got to do this. So I think it's around how do we set those parameters around our systems to unlock the capital into a way that nature and the economy can work, and climate change at the same time. So I think, we've said for us, it's around, public, we want to have a net zero test, but that's around aligning all of our finances. And in private, we want to make sure there's mandatory action plans, but we need to make sure longer term that in that 1.5 and in that pursuing 1.5, we do have a restoration of nature at the same time. So, and I agree with Minette, we all need to work together, but we can't forget, I think sometimes we get so caught up in the busyness of life and the sort of the economy as it is told to us and system, but we created this system, we can change it.
And Ruth.
Yeah, I think from the political point of view, I think it's very much needing to change the conversation, because the way we've done policy and economics for generations has sort of assumed that our economy is somehow external to our ecosystems and our biosphere. And we know that that isn't the case. So I think we very much need to shift the conversation that way. We probably need a wider range of headline economic measures, for example, that take into account things like depreciation of natural capital. So I think all of those things are going to be really key. I think the other thing that's going to be key is to make sure that we don't get stuck on a conversation where it's changing to a net zero lifestyle, to protecting nature, is always weighed up against the cost, and it's seen as a cost. Yeah, okay, there will be costs, definitely, there will be changes, but there is also huge opportunity. And I think sometimes I feel a bit depressed when I see people colleagues in the press go, oh, this is going to cost so much, and it's going to cost my constituents, and it's going to cost your constituents if we don't do anything, because we're going to have an absolute apocalypse on our hands when it comes to our climate. So there will be a huge cost if we don't do anything. Yes, there will be costs if we act, but there are huge opportunities with that as well. An enormous amount of jobs that we can create, take a great lead in growing industries, and I think that's what we need to keep focused on.
Okay, well, thank you to our panellists all very much. Thank you to WWF for supporting this event this afternoon for that. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you for joining. Will you please join me in thanking our panellists?